Hello and welcome back. We now take a closer look at how to work with protocols in OpenBIS. So before we start, what actually are protocols? We're quite familiar with them in our everyday life. Take for example if you want to bake a cake. We do have our ingredients, so like flour and eggs. We also have devices or instruments like this mixer for example, or the oven where we bake, and we do need to follow a recipe so that our cake is nice and tasty. So in a sense, a recipe is a standardized way of doing things, which is exactly what we want to do with a protocol. So protocols describe what we want to do. So these are not the same as the outcome of our actions or the artifacts that we may create. They are a description of how we proceed to create those. Protocols help us to describe explicitly what we want to do. So for example, instead of saying, oh, we just use the standard way in preparing a sample, like the standard for whom, does everybody know about the standard? We can say we do follow the exact same steps every single time. This also allows us to promote reproducible results because we do repeat things in the same way, and it also promotes comparable results because we can achieve consistency across groups but also across time. So when we typically work in an experimental workflow, we have the samples that we work on, so that is what we want to analyze. We have the instruments, what we do our experiments with, for example. Then we have the measurements themselves, this is the outcome of what we want to achieve, and we have the protocols. And as we discussed before, this is like a recipe that we need to follow to achieve our outcomes. Of course, not all the ingredients may be needed in all situations. So as an example, say we want to prepare a sample for an electron microscope image, and then we may have one or more polishing or grinding steps or etching or something like this. So we have our sample and then we follow it by a polishing or a grinding step, and this is defined by a recipe or a protocol, like how do we actually do this polishing. And then followed by this we may have an etching step, and that again is defined by a protocol. For example, what kind of chemicals do we use and how long do we apply these chemicals for. And then we can of course combine those two protocols, and that describes exactly how we prepare our sample before we put it into the electron microscope. Of course, depending on how many steps we have either a combination of protocols or a longer protocols, and then we need to define, when we look at how we set up these protocols, what makes sense. How do we use this in OpenBIS then? The protocols, there are two ways of using them. We can use a general protocol, and this is what we look at first. They are part of the general inventory. You can find the ones that are defined already under methods protocols, and there are various folders which have already been set up, and of course this will be extended with time. Behind the hood they are essentially OpenBIS collections, so they can be interacted with as with any other object. And you can see on the right an example. So we have the methods folder, and in there are the protocols, and then we have different areas so we can find them more easily. Let's take a simple example, the electropolishing, and that can have many more properties. Of course, here we only have very few properties, and as in OpenBIS we can use parent-child relationships. So for example, this electropolishing protocol can link to, say, the machines that we apply this protocol with, like the actual device that does the electropolishing, or if we need any consumables in the process, we can link those as well. So when we use the protocol in our measurement, for example, or in our preparation of a sample, then we can use them in the same way we add parents in other situations. So we add the protocol as a parent, and we need to sort of think a little bit about where we add this parent, so we need to choose a suitable place. For example, if we had a protocol for casting, that would most likely be the suitable place to link it to the creation of the sample themselves, so we would link this as a parent to the sample. If we have, for example, the preparation of the sample, say for example for an electron microscope image, then we will probably link that to the experiment when we conduct the whole sequence of preparing the sample and then analyzing it. That sort of begs the question a bit, how many protocols do we have? So of course there are two extremes. We can either have a very small approach where we say every single step is a single protocol, and then we need to combine lots of protocols, or everything goes into one protocol, but then we need sort of lots of variations because we can't cover everything with this. So neither of these are of course ideal. For case A, we can map everything, but then we have a lot of protocols and a lot of complexity to sort of have the parent-child relationships correctly and really include all of them. If we have B, then we need a lot of protocols because they're not modular enough, so we need something in between. So when we define the general protocols, we need to look at typical use cases, and this is what we need to explore throughout the SFB or CRC. What makes sense to put in there? What are repeatable blocks of steps that we do all the time and that we want to establish as a standard? And then of course you can have local protocols in your own collection, and what we discuss next, copies for specific variations. So what are local copies of general protocols? This is a special feature of OpenBIS for protocols that doesn't exist for any other entities. Protocols can be copied to create a local variation. So first of all, when we do this, we add the general protocol from the inventory as a parent. So this is what we do on the top right here. And then if you scroll to the right, there is a little selection window called operations, and there you can say copy to experiment, and then you need to give it a new name. And this then automatically updates the parent that you created, and now you have a local copy of that general protocol in your area and you link to it automatically. So here nothing has changed that on the content wise, it's just that you no longer take as parent the one from the general inventory but your own copy, and now that you have a local copy you can edit it. Note that the local copy retains the general one as a parent, so you can always go back to where you started from. So this you can, for example, use that if you have a general protocol that applies mostly, but you want to change small variations. For example, you want to make a sequence of tests, or you want to work out if a new standard protocol would make sense, then you can use local protocols and edit the values there. So in summary, protocols are standard operating procedures, so they are standard ways of doing things, and they describe explicitly how we do things repeatedly in the same way. So this allows us to be more concrete and more explicit instead of saying the standard way, where nobody really knows whose standard this is anyway. It allows us to establish a common way of doing things which promotes consistency and reproducible science, and also we can have the flexibility of general protocols where we have the established standards, and amend this with the local copies where we need to make specific changes to particular experiments. Thank you.